The harsh whistle of the locomotive pierced the dusty air as Zara Montgomery clutched her small valise with trembling hands. Spring of 1875 had arrived in Cottonwood Springs, Colorado territory, but the promise it held was rapidly evaporating like morning dew under the merciless western sun. She had traveled over 2,000 miles on the promise of marriage, only to find that the man who had sent for her was nowhere to be found. Final stop, Cottonwood Springs. The conductor called out, his voice gruff from years of shouting over the roar of engines. Zara stepped down onto the wooden platform, her blue calico dress the finest she owned already gathering dust from the wind. Her chestnut hair, carefully pinned that morning, had begun to escape its confines during the jarring final leg of her journey. 22 years old and utterly alone, she scanned the small gathering of people on the platform, searching for a face that might belong to Jonathan Pierce, the man whose letters had brought her west. The station master approached, clipboard in hand. "You waiting for someone to collect you, miss?" "Yes, sir. Mr. Jonathan Pierce arranged for me to come. I'm his. That is to say, I was to be his bride." The words felt strange on her tongue, a mixture of embarrassment and fading hope. The station master's expression shifted, eyes dropping to study his boots. "Pierce, you say? Jonathan Pierce?" "Yes, sir. Do you know where I might find him?" A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the hiss of the departing train. "Miss, I'm awful sorry to tell you this, but Jonathan Pierce died 3 weeks back. Typhoid fever took him fast." The blood drained from Zara's face. "Died, but His last letter was just." Her voice trailed off as she fumbled in her reticule for the worn envelope, dated barely a month earlier. "News travels slow out here, miss, especially when there's no family to send word." The station master shifted uncomfortably. "Train back east don't leave until Thursday. You can wait in the station if you'd like." Zara felt the stares of the remaining passengers and townspeople upon her. A mail-order bride with no groom, what could be more pathetic? Her funds were nearly depleted after the journey west. The thought of begging her stern brother for money to return to Philadelphia made her stomach clench. He had made it abundantly clear that her decision to become a mail-order bride was foolish and beneath their family's station, diminished though it had become after their parents' deaths. As the station master walked away, the crowd on the platform began to disperse, leaving Zara standing alone with her single valise. Tears threatened, but she blinked them back furiously. She would not give these strangers the satisfaction of seeing her break. "Excuse me, miss." A deep voice came from behind her. Zara turned to find herself looking up at a tall man with broad shoulders and sun-bronzed skin. His dark blonde hair was partially hidden beneath a well-worn cowboy hat, and his eyes were the color of a summer sky. Dust clung to his denim pants and cotton shirt, and a leather vest completed his distinctly Western appearance. "I couldn't help overhearing," he said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. "You're the bride Pierce sent for." "I was to be," Zara answered, struggling to maintain her composure. "But it seems I've traveled all this way for nothing." The man studied her for a moment. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but she guessed him to be no more than 30. There was a gentleness in his eyes that contrasted with his rugged appearance. "Name's Asher Fletcher," he said, extending a calloused hand. "I ranch about 10 miles outside of town. Knew Jonathan some. He was a good man." Zara took his hand briefly. "Zara Montgomery, I appreciate your condolences, Mr. Fletcher, but I'm afraid they don't solve my predicament." Asher replaced his hat, shifting his weight from one boot to the other. "No, I reckon they don't." He glanced around the nearly deserted platform, then back at Zara. "Miss Montgomery, I don't mean to be forward, but this town ain't exactly welcoming to a woman alone with no prospects." "I'm well aware of that, Mr. Fletcher," Zara replied, a hint of defiance creeping into her voice despite her desperate situation. Asher cleared his throat. "What I mean to say is, I will." Zara blinked in confusion. "You will what exactly?" "I will claim you as your husband, that is." His cheeks colored slightly beneath his tan. "If you'd be willing, of course." Zara's mouth fell open in shock. "Mr. Fletcher, we've only just met. You can't possibly—" "I know how it sounds," he interrupted, his voice low and earnest. "But I've got a good ranch, small but growing. I've been meaning to send for a bride myself, just never got around to writing the letters." He gestured vaguely toward the dusty Main Street. "There's not much for you here otherwise. The saloon's always looking for girls, but—" He didn't need to finish the thought. Zara understood perfectly what became of unmarried women with no means of support in frontier towns. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" she asked, suspicion warring with desperate hope. "Jonathan was a neighbor, not a close friend but a good man. He spoke highly of you in the letters he shared." Asher's blue eyes met hers directly. "I'm offering you a marriage of convenience, Miss Montgomery, a roof over your head, food on the table, and my protection. In return, you'd keep house and help with the ranch. Nothing improper. Until you're ready, if ever." Zara's mind raced. The prospect of marriage to a complete stranger was terrifying, but was it any different from what she had already agreed to with Jonathan? And what choice did she really have? I would need time to consider," she said finally. Asher nodded. "Of course. I've got business in town today. I'll be heading back to the ranch tomorrow morning. If you decide yes, meet me at the general store at 8. If not, I wish you the best of luck, Miss Montgomery." With that, he tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Zara staring after him, her heart pounding with uncertainty and the faintest flicker of hope. The Cottonwood Springs Hotel was a far cry from the establishments Zara had known in Philadelphia. The narrow bed sagged in the middle, and the thin curtains did little to block the afternoon sun. But it was clean enough, and the elderly proprietress, Mrs. Wilkins, had been kind when Zara explained her situation, or a version of it that preserved her dignity. "Poor dear," Mrs. Wilkins had said, patting Zara's hand. "Lost your intended before you even reached him. It's a hard country out here, especially for women alone." Now, as evening approached, Zara sat on the edge of the bed, Jonathan's letters spread before her. She had read them so many times that she could recite passages from memory. His descriptions of Colorado had painted a picture of rugged beauty and opportunity. The small ranch he was building, the house he'd prepared for his bride, the future they would forge together, dreams that had died with him. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. "Miss Montgomery," Mrs. Wilkins's voice called softly. "There's supper downstairs if you're hungry, dear." "Thank you," Zara replied. "I'll be down shortly." Gathering the letters and tucking them back into her valise, Zara straightened her dress and attempted to tidy her hair. The small mirror on the wall reflected a young woman with shadows beneath her hazel eyes and worry etched across her brow. The dining room was occupied by only a few other guests, a traveling salesman who barely looked up from his newspaper, and an older couple who whispered together at a corner table. Zara took a seat near the window, gazing out at the dusty Main Street as twilight descended on Cottonwood Springs. Mrs. Wilkins brought a plate of stew and a slice of cornbread. "Eat up, dear. You look like you could use a good meal." "Thank you," Zara murmured, suddenly aware of how little she had eaten during her journey. As she ate, Mrs. Wilkins lingered nearby, her desire for conversation evident. "Where are you from originally, Miss Montgomery?" "Philadelphia," Zara replied between bites of the surprisingly flavorful stew. "My goodness, that's quite a journey. Do you have family back there?" "A brother," Zara said, her tone making it clear she didn't wish to elaborate. Mrs. Wilkins nodded, understanding the hint. Well, what will you do now? Will you return east? The question hung in the air as Zara set down her spoon. What would she do? Return to Philadelphia in shame to face her brother's smug satisfaction at her failure? Or accept the proposal of a stranger, a cowboy she knew nothing about beyond his name and the apparent decency he had shown today? I'm considering an offer of employment, Zara said carefully. Mrs. Wilkins's eyebrows rose. Oh, in town here. There's not much for a refined young lady like yourself. Unless— No, not in town, Zara interrupted, knowing where the woman's thoughts were headed. A ranching position, actually, as a housekeeper. It wasn't entirely a lie, though it omitted the marriage aspect of Asher Fletcher's proposal. A ranch, you say? Mrs. Wilkins leaned closer, lowering her voice. Whose ranch, if you don't mind my asking? Mr. Fletcher's. Asher Fletcher. Mrs. Wilkins's face brightened with recognition. Asher Fletcher. Well now, that's different. He's a good man, that one. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's honest in his dealings. Took over that spread from old man Turner about 5 years back, and has made something of it, from what I hear. Zara felt a small knot of tension ease in her chest. You know him well. Well enough to say he's not like some of the rough sorts around here. His ranch isn't the biggest, but it's growing. He brings in some fine cattle to market twice a year. Mrs. Wilkins nodded approvingly. If you're considering working for Asher Fletcher, I'd say you could do a lot worse, especially for a young woman in your situation. The veiled reference to her predicament wasn't lost on Zara. Yes, I suppose I could. After finishing her meal, Zara returned to her room, Mrs. Wilkins's words echoing in her mind. She moved to the small window, gazing out at the unfamiliar constellation of stars over the western landscape. The sky seemed vast and overwhelming, just like the decision before her. She thought of the letter in her valise from her brother, written in response to her announcement that she was traveling west to marry. You've made your bed with this reckless decision, he had written. Don't expect to find it waiting for you at home when this Western fantasy inevitably crumbles. Zara's fingers tightened on the windowsill. There was no home waiting for her in Philadelphia, only her brother's cold charity and the whispers that would follow a failed mail-order bride. And then there was Asher Fletcher, with his direct blue gaze and his unexpected offer. A marriage of convenience, he'd called it. A business arrangement, safety and security in exchange for her labor. It wasn't the romantic future she had secretly dreamed of when exchanging letters with Jonathan, but perhaps it was the best she could hope for now. Decision crystallizing in her mind, Zara turned from the window. She would meet Asher Fletcher at the general store tomorrow morning. Whatever the future held on his ranch, it had to be better than the alternatives. Morning broke clear and bright over Cottonwood Springs. Zara had slept fitfully, but rose with the dawn to prepare herself for what lay ahead. She donned her second-best dress, a modest gray garment with white collar and cuffs, and pinned her hair neatly at the nape of her neck. The looking-glass reflected a composed young woman, giving no hint of the turmoil beneath the surface. After a quick breakfast of coffee and toast, Zara settled her bill with Mrs. Wilkins, who pressed a small package of biscuits into her hands. For the journey, the older woman said with a knowing smile. The Fletcher place is a good 10 miles out, and Miss Montgomery, she added, lowering her voice, I hope things work out for you, truly. The simple kindness nearly undid Zara's carefully maintained composure. Thank you, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Clutching her valise, Zara made her way down the dusty main street toward Hartwell's general store. The town was beginning to stir, with shopkeepers sweeping their boardwalks and ranch hands emerging from the saloon where they'd spent the night. A few curious glances followed her progress, but Zara kept her eyes forward, spine straight as a ramrod. Asher Fletcher was already waiting outside the store, his tall figure leaning against a hitching post. Today, he wore a clean shirt beneath his leather vest, and his boots had been polished. The sight of him clearly having made an effort for her arrival caused an unexpected flutter in Zara's chest. He straightened as she approached, removing his hat. "Miss Montgomery, you came." "I did," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I've considered your offer, Mr. Fletcher, and I accept." Relief flashed across his features, quickly masked by a more neutral expression. "I'm glad to hear it. I've already spoken with Pastor Wilson. He can perform the ceremony this morning if that suits you." The reality of what she was agreeing to hit Zara with sudden force. By noon, she would be Mrs. Asher Fletcher, married to a man she had known for less than a day. Asher must have read the momentary panic in her eyes. "We don't have to rush if you'd rather wait, though folks might talk if you come to the ranch unwed." "No," Zara said, squaring her shoulders. "This morning is fine. I didn't expect it so soon." Asher nodded, understanding in his blue eyes. "It's just papers and promises today, Miss Montgomery. Like I said yesterday, nothing more expected until you're ready." His reiteration of those terms steadied her. "Then let's proceed, Mr. Fletcher." The ceremony in Pastor Wilson's small study was brief and perfunctory. The pastor, a balding man with kind eyes, seemed unsurprised by the arrangement, suggesting such marriages of convenience were not uncommon in the territory. An elderly church secretary and her husband served as witnesses, beaming at the couple as though this were a love match years in the making. Zara repeated the vows mechanically, her voice clear, despite the surreal nature of the moment. When Asher slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, "It was my mother's," he explained quietly. The weight of it felt strange and significant. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Pastor Wilson declared, closing his Bible with a smile. "Mr. Fletcher, you may kiss your bride." Zara tensed, but Asher merely leaned forward and pressed a chaste kiss to her cheek, his lips warm against her skin for the briefest moment. "Congratulations to you both," the pastor said, shaking Asher's hand vigorously. "May God bless your union with prosperity and, in time, children to carry on your name." Zara felt her cheeks flush at the mention of children, a subject she and Asher had not discussed in their hasty arrangement. Asher himself looked momentarily discomfited, but recovered with a polite nod. "Thank you, Pastor. We should be going if we want to reach the ranch before dark." Outside, Asher led Zara to where a wagon waited, already loaded with supplies from the general store. He helped her climb onto the wooden seat, handling her as carefully as if she were made of fine china. "I usually ride alongside," he explained, gesturing to a handsome chestnut gelding tied to the back of the wagon. "But I'll drive today, keep you company on the journey." As they pulled away from Cottonwood Springs, Zara sat rigidly on the hard seat, acutely aware of the man beside her, her husband, in the eyes of the law if not yet in truth. The road stretched before them, a winding dirt track that led into the foothills visible in the distance. "It's beautiful country," Asher said after they'd traveled in silence for several miles. "Different from what you're used to, I expect." "Very different," Zara agreed, taking in the vast expanse of prairie giving way to pine-covered hills. "In Philadelphia, one can hardly see the horizon for all the buildings and smoke. Do you miss it?" "The city?" Zara considered the question, surprised to find the answer wasn't a simple yes. "I miss certain comforts. Hot water whenever one wishes, theaters, libraries. But there's something overwhelming about this landscape. Frightening but magnificent too." Asher nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. That's exactly it. First time I saw these mountains, I knew I'd never be happy anywhere else. There's freedom here that you can't find back east. And danger, too, I imagine. That's part of the freedom, he said, his expression turning thoughtful. Facing the dangers on your own terms, making your own way, it's not for everyone. Yet here I am, Zara said softly. Asher glanced at her, his blue eyes unreadable. Yes, here you are, Mrs. Fletcher. The sound of her new name sent an odd shiver through Zara. In the space of a morning, she had ceased to be Zara Montgomery and become someone else entirely, a rancher's wife, a frontier woman, Mrs. Asher Fletcher. Tell me about your ranch, she said, desperate to fill the silence that had fallen between them. Asher's face brightened visibly at the topic. It's not large by Colorado standards, about 500 acres. Good water from a year-round creek, plenty of grazing for the cattle. I run about 100 head, mostly Herefords. There's a small apple orchard near the house that the previous owner's wife planted. Bears good fruit in the fall. And the house? Zara asked, trying to picture what would soon be her home. It's solid. 2 stories built from local pine. 3 bedrooms upstairs, parlor and kitchen below. Nothing fancy, but I keep it in good repair. He paused, seeming suddenly self-conscious. It'll need a woman's touch, I expect. Been just me there since I bought the place. No family. The question slipped out before Zara could consider whether it was too personal. No, Asher replied, his tone neutral. My parents died back in '65. Father took a Confederate bullet at Petersburg, and Mother followed from pneumonia that winter. I was 19, working a ranch in Texas then. Drifted west after that, worked as a hand on spreads in New Mexico and Arizona before settling here 5 years back. I'm sorry about your parents, Zara said softly. I lost mine too, father to a heart ailment 3 years ago, and mother the year after. That's partly why I answered Mr. Pierce's advertisement. My brother Elias inherited everything and made it quite clear I was a burden he'd prefer not to bear. Asher's hands tightened on the reins. Doesn't sound like much of a brother. We were never close, Zara admitted. 10 years between us, and he always resented my mother's attention. After their deaths well, let's just say he was eager to see me established elsewhere. His loss, Asher said simply, and the matter-of-fact way he said it warmed something in Zara's chest. They fell into a more comfortable silence as the wagon continued its journey. The terrain grew more varied, with stands of aspen and pine breaking up the rolling grasslands. Occasionally, Asher would point out landmarks or wildlife, a hawk circling overhead, a distant herd of pronghorn antelope, the peaks of mountains whose names Zara tried to commit to memory. By mid-afternoon, they stopped to rest the horses beside a small creek. Asher spread a blanket in the shade of a cottonwood tree and unpacked a simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried apple slices. Zara accepted the food gratefully, suddenly aware of how hungry she was. We're about halfway, Asher informed her as they ate. Should reach the ranch by sunset if the weather holds. Zara nodded, trying to ignore the nervousness that increased with every mile closer to her new home. Mr. Fletcher, Asher, he corrected gently. Seems strange for my wife to call me Mr. Fletcher. Asher, she amended, the name feeling foreign on her tongue. I realize we've discussed very little about expectations, beyond your generous assurance regarding physical matters. She felt her cheeks heat but forced herself to continue. What duties will you expect me to perform? I should warn you that my domestic skills are somewhat limited. I can cook basic meals and keep a house tidy, but I've never preserved food or made soap or— Zara, he interrupted, his use of her given name stopping her anxious flow of words. I don't expect you to arrive knowing everything about ranch life. You'll learn what you need to know in time. As for duties, keeping the house and cooking meals would be a help. I've got a woman from town who comes once a month to do heavy cleaning, and she can show you how to preserve and such when harvest time comes. You've thought this through, Zara observed, slightly surprised. Asher's mouth quirked into a half-smile. I've been considering taking a wife for some time, just never got around to writing to one of those matrimonial agencies. And now you haven't had to, Zara said, a hint of wryness in her tone. A bride delivered right to Cottonwood Springs free of charge. To her surprise, Asher laughed a rich, warm sound that transformed his serious face. I wouldn't say free. That ring cost my father a month's wages back in '43. Zara found herself smiling in return, the tension between them easing momentarily. She twisted the gold band on her finger, noting how the afternoon sun caught its smooth surface. It's a lovely ring. Thank you for entrusting me with something so meaningful to your family. It suits you, he said simply, his eyes lingering on her hand before he turned away to pack up their meal. We should get moving if we want to reach home before dark. Home. The word echoed in Zara's mind as they continued their journey. She had left behind the only home she had ever known, traveling thousands of miles to marry a stranger who was now dead. And yet here she was, heading toward another home with a different stranger, one who was now, by law, her husband. The afternoon sun slanted lower, casting long shadows across the landscape as the wagon climbed steadily into more rugged terrain. The dirt track narrowed, winding between rock outcroppings and stands of pine. Finally, they crested a rise and Asher drew the horses to a halt. There it is, he said, pointing ahead. Fletcher Ranch. Zara leaned forward, taking in the view spread before them. A broad valley stretched out below, bisected by a winding creek lined with cottonwoods. Nestled against the eastern slope, protected from the prevailing winds, stood a two-story house built of sturdy logs, its windows reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. Nearby stood a large barn, corral, and several smaller outbuildings. Cattle dotted the pastures, dark shapes against the green spring grass. It's lovely, Zara said, and meant it. There was a harmony to the way the buildings fit into the landscape, as though they had grown naturally from the earth rather than being imposed upon it. Asher's expression softened as he gazed at his property. It's a good place, peaceful, most days anyway. He clicked to the horses, and they began the descent into the valley. As they drew closer, Zara could make out more details: the neat vegetable garden beside the house, the apple orchard with its trees just beginning to blossom, the smoke rising from the chimney. You left a fire burning? She asked, concerned. No, that'll be Miguel. He works for me part-time, helps with the cattle and heavier chores. Probably started a fire when he saw us coming down the road. Sure enough, as they pulled up to the house, the front door opened to reveal a middle-aged Mexican man with a weathered face and kind eyes. He removed his hat as the wagon came to a stop. "Senor Fletcher," he greeted. Then his gaze fell on Zara, surprise evident in his expression. "Miguel Ruiz, meet Mrs. Fletcher," Asher said, jumping down from the wagon and coming around to help Zara descend. "My wife." Miguel's eyes widened, but he recovered quickly, offering Zara a respectful nod. "Senora Fletcher, welcome to your home." "Thank you, Mr. Ruiz," Zara replied, grateful for the steadying hand Asher kept at her elbow as her feet touched the ground, stiff from the long journey. "Miguel lives in the small cabin beyond the orchard with his son, Carlos," Asher explained. "Carlos helps out too, mainly with the horses. They're both fine hands." Miguel smiled at the praise. "I have prepared supper, senor. I thought you would be hungry after your journey." "That was thoughtful, thank you," Asher replied. "We'll bring in Mrs. Fletcher's things and then I'll show her around the house." As Miguel headed toward the barn, Asher turned to Zara. "He's a good man. Been with me since I bought the place. His wife died in childbirth many years ago, so it's just him and Carlos." Zara nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. This was her home now. These people, Asher, Miguel, Carlos, were her household. She, who had never lived anywhere but her parents' Philadelphia townhouse, was now mistress of a Colorado ranch. "Shall we go inside?" Asher asked gently, seeming to sense her momentary distress. Zara took a deep breath and squared her shoulders. "Yes, I'd like to see my new home." The interior of the house was dimly lit by the fading daylight and the fire Miguel had built in the stone fireplace that dominated one wall of the main room. Simple but sturdy furniture filled the space: a oak dining table with 6 chairs, a leather sofa and 2 armchairs arranged before the fireplace, and bookshelves that, to Zara's pleasant surprise, held quite a number of volumes. "The kitchen is through here," Asher said, leading her through a doorway at the back of the main room. The kitchen was larger than Zara had expected, with a cast-iron cookstove, a pump at the sink that Asher explained drew water from a cistern, and ample cupboards and work surfaces. A door led out to what appeared to be a covered porch where various tools hung neatly on the wall. "There's a root cellar underneath for storing vegetables and such," Asher explained, "and a smokehouse out back for meat." Returning to the main room, he pointed out a small study off to one side. "I keep the ranch accounts in there. Not much to see." Then he led her upstairs, lighting a lamp as the interior grew darker with the setting sun. The upper floor contained 3 bedrooms and a small sitting area at the top of the stairs. "This is the main bedroom," Asher said, opening a door to reveal a spacious room containing a large 4-poster bed, a chest of drawers, and a wardrobe. "It has the best view of the valley." Zara stepped inside, noting the simple quilt on the bed and the absence of any personal touches that might mark it as a space regularly inhabited. "This will be your room," Asher said, his voice carefully neutral. "I've been using the smaller bedroom across the hall, and I'll continue to do so." The third room was meant to be for children someday, I suppose. It's empty now except for some storage. Zara turned to face him, moved by his continued consideration of her comfort. "Thank you, Asher, this is very generous," he shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. "It's your home now, too. You should be comfortable in it." Their eyes met in the lamplight, and for a moment, Zara felt a curious connection to this man she barely knew, this husband of hers who was still, in many ways, a stranger. The moment was broken by the sound of footsteps on the stairs, followed by Miguel's voice calling, "Señor, I have brought the señora's bag up." "Thank you, Miguel," Asher replied, moving to take the valise from him. "We'll be down shortly for supper." After Miguel departed, Asher placed Zara's valise on the bed. "I'll leave you to freshen up. Take your time. I need to check on a few things in the barn anyway." When he had gone, Zara sank onto the edge of the bed, finally alone for the first time since morning. The enormity of the day's events washed over her: the hasty wedding, the long journey, and now this strange new home with its unfamiliar sounds and smells. She was Mrs. Asher Fletcher now, a rancher's wife in the Colorado Territory, thousands of miles from everything she had ever known. Yet as she gazed around the room that was now hers, noting the clean curtains at the windows, the fresh water in the pitcher on the washstand, the small vase of wildflowers someone had placed on the chest of drawers, she felt an unexpected sense of possibility. This was not the future she had imagined when she agreed to marry Jonathan Pierce, but perhaps it could be a good future nonetheless. Rising, Zara moved to the window and looked out at the valley below, now bathed in the purple light of dusk. In the distance, She could see cattle moving slowly across the pasture, and closer to the house, the apple trees stood like sentinels, their blossoms pale against the gathering darkness. "A new beginning," she whispered to herself, and began to unpack her few belongings. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that both surprised and comforted Zara. She rose early, often finding that Asher had already been up for hours, tending to the morning chores. They would breakfast together in the kitchen, a quiet meal of coffee, eggs, and whatever bread Zara had managed to bake the previous day. Then Asher would depart for his day's work, leaving Zara to the tasks of maintaining the household. Those tasks proved more challenging than she had anticipated. Having grown up in a home with servants, Zara had never needed to master many domestic skills. Her first attempts at bread were disastrous, heavy, dense loaves that even the chickens pecked at suspiciously. Her laundry efforts left Asher's work, shirts slightly gray rather than white. And her initial forays into cooking dinner resulted in meals that Asher ate with stoic politeness, though she caught him feeding scraps to his dog, Rusty, when he thought she wasn't looking. But Zara Montgomery Fletcher was nothing if not determined. She had not traveled across the country to become a burden on yet another man. So she persevered, learning through trial and error, and occasionally seeking advice from Miguel's sister, Elena, who lived in a neighboring ranch and visited once a week. "No, no, Senora," Elena would say, taking the spoon from Zara's hand and demonstrating the proper way to stir a pot of beans. "Like this, see, gentle but firm." By the end of her first month at Fletcher Ranch, Zara could produce a decent loaf of bread, maintain a respectable vegetable garden, and prepare meals that Asher not only ate but sometimes complimented. She had also begun to appreciate the rhythm of ranch life, the way each season brought its own tasks and challenges, the satisfaction of seeing immediate results from one's labor. Asher, for his part, remained true to his word. He maintained his separate bedroom and never pressured Zara for anything beyond the companionable relationship they were slowly building. In the evenings, they often sat together before the fire, Asher reading one of his many books or working on ranch accounts, Zara mending clothes or learning to knit under Elena's tutelage. Sometimes they talked, Asher telling stories of his years as a drifting ranch hand or describing the local geography and wildlife. Zara found herself sharing memories of Philadelphia, of her parents, of the life she had left behind. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, something shifted between them. Zara began to notice things about Asher she hadn't before: the way the corner of his mouth quirked up when he was amused, but trying not to show it, the gentleness of his hands when he tended to an injured calf, the depth of knowledge reflected in his casual comments about the land and its creatures. She found herself watching for his return in the evenings, taking extra care with dinner on the days he'd been working particularly hard, feeling a strange flutter in her chest when their hands accidentally brushed while passing dishes at the table. One evening in late May, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, Asher turned to her with an unusually hesitant expression. "I've been meaning to ask," he began, "if there's anything you need from town. I'll be heading in tomorrow to pick up supplies. Some more fabric would be nice if Mr. Hartwell has any suitable for curtains," Zara replied. "The ones in the parlor are quite faded." Asher nodded. "Anything else? For yourself, I mean." Zara considered the question. In truth, there were many small luxuries she missed from her former life: scented soap, hairpins that didn't rust, books that weren't exclusively about cattle breeding or Western exploration. But she was reluctant to ask for such frivolities when she was still learning to contribute meaningfully to the household. Perhaps some tea, she ventured. If it's not too expensive. Coffee is fine, of course, but sometimes in the afternoon. Tea, Asher repeated as if committing it to memory. What kind do you prefer? The question touched her unexpectedly. It had been so long since anyone had inquired about her preferences. Earl Grey, if available, but any black tea would be welcome. Earl Grey, he nodded. Anything else? Zara hesitated, then decided to be bold. A book, perhaps. Something not about cattle. She smiled to soften the implied criticism. Not that your library isn't informative. To her delight, Asher chuckled. Not much for novels about breeding better Herefords, are you? His blue eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, she noticed. What kind of books do you enjoy? I've always been fond of Mr. Dickens, Zara admitted, and Miss Austen, but anything with a story would be welcome. I'll see what Mr. Hartwell has on his shelves, Asher promised. Though I can't guarantee the literary selection in Cottonwood Springs will meet Philadelphia standards. I've adjusted my expectations in many areas, Zara replied with a small smile. Literature can be one more. They fell silent again, watching as the brilliant sunset faded to deeper blues and purples. Fireflies began to appear in the gathering dusk, their tiny lights blinking among the apple trees. It's beautiful here, Zara said softly. I never imagined such peace could exist. Asher's gaze was on her profile rather than the darkening landscape. I'm glad you found some happiness here, Zara. I worried at first that you'd regret your decision. Zara turned to face him, surprised by the vulnerability in his normally confident voice. I don't regret it, not anymore. It was the first time she had admitted this aloud, even to herself. This isn't the life I expected, but I'm beginning to think it might be the life I needed. Something flickered in Asher's eyes, a warmth, an intensity that made Zara's breath catch. For a moment, she thought he might reach for her hand, or perhaps say something more personal than their usual practical conversations. Instead, he stood abruptly. It's getting late. I should check on that new calf before turning in. Zara nodded, trying to hide her inexplicable disappointment. Of course. Good night, Asher. Good night, Zara, he replied, his voice gentler than usual. He paused at the porch steps, glancing back at her. I'm glad you're here, truly. With that, he disappeared into the darkness, leaving Zara to wonder at the strange ache in her chest and the way her pulse had quickened at his words. True to his promise, Asher returned from town the next day with Earl Grey tea, blue and white checked fabric for new curtains, and 3 novels, a well-worn copy of Pride and Prejudice, a newer edition of David Copperfield, and a title Zara didn't recognize by an author named Mark Twain. The shopkeeper's wife recommended this one, Asher explained, handing her the Twain volume. Said it's quite popular back east. Zara accepted the books with genuine delight. Thank you, Asher. This is so thoughtful. He shrugged, looking pleased despite his attempt at nonchalance. Seems only fair you should have something to read besides cattle journals. Besides, he added with a hint of mischief, maybe some of Mr. Dickens's prose will rub off on you and improve your letters to your brother. Zara had written to Elias shortly after her marriage, informing him of Jonathan's death and her subsequent marriage to Asher. The reply, when it finally arrived, had been typically cold and judgmental, expressing little surprise that her Western adventure had gone awry and even less interest in her new circumstances. I doubt anything could improve communication with Elias, Zara replied dryly. But I appreciate the optimism. As spring deepened into summer, the rhythm of ranch life intensified. June brought the first cattle drive of the year with Asher, Miguel, Carlos, and 2 additional hired hands moving a portion of the herd to the higher summer pastures. Zara found herself alone at the ranch for 3 days, an experience both frightening and oddly empowering. She managed the household tasks, tended the vegetable garden, and even successfully dealt with a fox that tried to raid the henhouse, though her hands shook for an hour after firing the shotgun Asher had taught her to use, just in case. When Asher returned, dusty and tired but satisfied with the successful drive, Zara surprised herself by rushing out to meet him, relief and happiness evident in her face. If Asher was equally pleased to see her, he masked it well, though he did present her with a small bundle of alpine wildflowers he'd gathered from the high meadows. "Thought you might like to see what grows up there," he said simply, handing her the slightly wilted blooms. Zara placed them in a jar of water on the kitchen table, where their bright colors reminded her of Asher's thoughtfulness each time she passed them. July brought intense heat and the constant threat of thunderstorms. Zara learned to read the weather as Asher did, noting the particular quality of stillness that preceded a storm, the specific shade of green-gray that signaled hail might be imminent. She grew accustomed to the sudden, violent thunderstorms that rolled across the valley, no longer startling at each crack of thunder or flash of lightning. It was during one such storm, as rain lashed against the windows and thunder shook the house to its foundations, that something fundamental shifted in her relationship with Asher. Zara had been in the kitchen, preserving the first batch of summer beans, when a particularly violent thunderclap directly overhead caused her to drop the jar she was filling. Glass and hot liquid splattered across the floor, and a sharp pain in her hand told her she'd been cut by the broken glass. "Damn," she muttered, a word she would never have uttered in Philadelphia but which seemed entirely appropriate to the situation. She was wrapping a kitchen towel around her bleeding palm when Asher burst through the door, soaked to the skin and clearly alarmed. "Are you all right?" "I heard the crash from the barn," he said, water dripping from his hat and coat onto the already wet floor. "I'm fine," Zara assured him. "Just startled by the thunder. I dropped a jar." Asher's eyes fell to the blood-spotted towel around her hand. "You're hurt." Before she could protest, he crossed the kitchen and gently took her hand in his, unwrapping the makeshift bandage to examine the cut. His hands were cold from the rain but impossibly gentle as they cradled hers. "It's not deep," he said, relief evident in his voice, "but it needs cleaning." "Sit down." Zara obeyed, watching as Asher moved efficiently around the kitchen, gathering clean cloths, the bottle of whiskey he kept for medicinal purposes, and a small tin of salve from the shelf above the stove. He pulled a chair close to hers and sat, taking her injured hand in his once more. "This will sting," he warned, pouring a small amount of whiskey over the cut. Zara hissed at the burning sensation but didn't pull away. Asher dabbed the wound dry with a clean cloth, then applied the salve with a feather-light touch. "You've done this before," Zara observed, trying to distract herself from both the pain and the unsettling awareness of his proximity. "Plenty of times," Asher replied, focused on wrapping a clean strip of cloth around her hand. "Ranching isn't gentle work." "No, I suppose it isn't," Zara murmured, noticing for the first time the network of small scars that marked Asher's hands and forearms, evidence of years of hard physical labor. When he finished bandaging her hand, Asher didn't immediately release it. Instead, he sat there, her smaller hand cradled in his larger ones, his thumbs absently tracing small circles on her wrist. The gesture was probably unconscious on his part, but it sent a warm current up Zara's arm and into her chest. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. Asher looked up, meeting her eyes, and Zara was struck by the intensity in his gaze. For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside, the storm continued to rage, rain pelting against the windows. But inside the kitchen, a different kind of electricity crackled in the air between them. "Zara," Asher began, his voice husky. Whatever he had been about to say was lost as a tremendous crash from outside jolted them both. Asher released her hand and was on his feet in an instant. "That sounded like it hit nearby," he said, moving to the window. "Damn! Lightning struck the big pine by the corral. Part of it's down on the fence." "Is it on fire?" Zara asked, joining him at the window. "No, the rain's too heavy, but I need to secure the horses before they spook and bolt through the broken fence." He turned to her, his expression regretful. "Will you be all right here?" "Of course," Zara replied, trying to ignore the irrational disappointment that their moment had been interrupted. "Be careful." Asher nodded, then surprised her by reaching out to briefly touch her cheek with his fingertips. "Stay inside. I'll be back as soon as I can." With that, he was gone, back into the storm, leaving Zara standing in the kitchen with her heart racing and her skin tingling where he had touched it. That evening, after Asher had returned and changed into dry clothes, they ate dinner in a strange, charged silence. The usual easy conversation was replaced by quick glances, and an awareness that something had shifted between them. Asher retired early, citing exhaustion from battling the storm, and Zara lay awake in her bed for hours, replaying the moment in the kitchen and wondering what Asher had been about to say before the lightning struck. The next morning, Asher was his usual self, polite, kind, but somewhat reserved. If he remembered the charged moment in the kitchen, he gave no indication, and Zara found herself wondering if she had imagined the intensity in his eyes, the gentleness of his touch. But something had changed, whether Asher acknowledged it or not. Zara found herself noticing him in new ways: the breadth of his shoulders as he chopped wood, the grace with which he handled his horses, the rare but transformative nature of his genuine smile. More than once, she caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, his expression a mixture of longing and uncertainty that mirrored her own confused feelings. August arrived with relentless heat, and the constant work of harvesting and preserving the garden's bounty. Zara spent long hours in the steaming kitchen, putting up jars of tomatoes, green beans, and corn for the winter months ahead. Asher and his men began the preparations for the fall cattle drive, mending tack, checking the herd, and planning the route to market in Denver. It was during this busy time that Zara received an unexpected letter from Philadelphia. Unlike her brother's terse communications, this envelope bore the return address of her childhood friend, Rebecca Sullivan. Inside was an 8-page letter filled with news of Philadelphia society, expressions of concern for Zara's welfare, and, most startlingly, an invitation. "William has business interests in Denver," Rebecca wrote, "and we will be traveling there in September. Might we impose upon your hospitality for a brief visit? I am so eager to see you, dear friend, and to meet this cowboy husband of yours." Zara sat at the kitchen table, reading and rereading the letter, emotions warring within her. Joy at the prospect of seeing Rebecca after more than a year. Anxiety about how her cultured friend would perceive her rustic life. And a strange, almost proprietary concern about introducing Rebecca to Asher. That evening, she showed the letter to Asher as they sat on the porch, enjoying a rare moment of leisure as the day's heat began to dissipate. "Of course they should come," Asher said after reading it. "If you want them to, that is." "I do," Zara admitted. "Rebecca was my dearest friend in Philadelphia, but—" She hesitated, unsure how to express her concerns. "But you're worried about what she'll think of the ranch," Asher finished for her. "Of our life here." "Not exactly, or not only that." Zara twisted her hands in her lap. Rebecca and William are Philadelphia, very proper. I'm afraid they might not understand us." Asher was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "What is there to understand? We're married. We run a ranch." "Yes, but—" Zara struggled to articulate the complex reality of their arrangement. "Our marriage isn't conventional." "Ah." Asher leaned back in his chair, his face unreadable in the gathering dusk. "You're concerned about the separate bedrooms." Zara felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "I just don't want to face uncomfortable questions, or for you to feel awkward." "We could tell them the truth," Asher suggested, "that it was a marriage of convenience." "No," Zara said quickly, surprising herself with the vehemence of her response. "I don't want them to think that what we have isn't real." The words hung in the evening air, laden with implications neither of them had voiced before. What did they have? A partnership, certainly. A friendship that had grown deeper with each passing month. But something more had been building between them, something Zara was only beginning to recognize and didn't yet have the courage to name. Asher studied her face in the fading light. "What do you want them to think, Zara?" It was a direct question, one that cut through the careful dance they'd been performing around their feelings. Zara took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I want them to see that I'm happy here, with you." She met his gaze steadily, despite the hammering of her heart. "Because I am." Asher's expression softened, and he reached across the space between their chairs to take her hand. "I'm happy too. Happier than I expected to be when I offered to marry you that day in Cottonwood Springs." His thumb traced the now familiar pattern on her wrist, sending the same warm current through her body. "We could make changes before your friends arrive," he suggested, his voice carefully neutral despite the significance of his words. "If that would make you more comfortable." Zara knew exactly what he was offering: to move into the main bedroom, to make their marriage a true one in every sense. The thought sent a flutter of both excitement and apprehension through her. "I don't want to change things just for appearance's sake," she said slowly. "That wouldn't be fair to either of us." Asher nodded, a flicker of disappointment crossing his features as he began to withdraw his hand. Zara tightened her grip, keeping his fingers entwined with hers. "But perhaps," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "it's time for changes regardless of Rebecca's visit." Asher went very still, his eyes searching hers in the dimming light. "Zara, are you saying—" "I'm saying that what began as a marriage of convenience has become something more to me," Zara said, finding courage in the warmth of his hand around hers. "And I hope it has for you too." The smile that spread across Asher's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, slow, radiant, transformative. "It has," he confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. "It has become everything to me." He stood, drawing her to her feet with their still joined hands, and then he was pulling her gently into his arms. One hand came up to cup her face, his touch as reverent as it had been when tending her injured hand weeks before. "May I kiss you, Mrs. Fletcher?" he asked, his eyes never leaving hers. "Please do, Mr. Fletcher," Zara replied, her lips curving into a smile even as they parted in anticipation. Their first real kiss was tentative, a gentle exploration that quickly deepened as months of unacknowledged longing broke free. Asher's arms tightened around her waist, drawing her closer, and Zara's hands slid up to his shoulders, feeling the solid strength of him beneath her fingertips. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Asher rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you standing alone on that train platform," he confessed. "Really?" Zara asked, surprised. Even then, you looked so brave despite everything, so determined." His thumb traced the curve of her cheek. "I admired you before I even knew your name," Zara smiled, remembering that fateful day that now seemed a lifetime ago. "And I thought you were just being charitable, offering to marry a stranded mail-order bride." "There might have been some charity in it," Asher admitted with a soft laugh. "But there was plenty of self-interest too. I'd been alone too long." "We both had," Zara said, lifting her hand to touch his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw with her fingertips. "But not anymore." Asher captured her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "Not anymore," he agreed. "Now, about those changes we discussed." Zara felt a blush rising to her cheeks but met his gaze steadily. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside." The smile Asher gave her was both tender and heated. "I believe that's an excellent suggestion, Mrs. Fletcher." Hand in hand, they walked into the house that had become their home, closing the door on the gathering night and opening it to a new chapter in their shared life. Rebecca and William Sullivan's visit in September brought an unexpected perspective to Zara's new life. Watching her Philadelphia friends' initial discomfort with the rustic conditions, their polite but evident shock at the outdoor privy, their tentative approach to Miguel's spicy cooking, their startled reactions to the casual manner in which Asher and Zara managed their household, Zara realized how completely she had adapted to ranch life. "Darling, you've become quite the frontier woman," Rebecca observed on their second day, as Zara competently butchered a chicken for dinner while maintaining a conversation about the latest fashions in Philadelphia. "I scarcely recognize my finishing school friend." "Necessity is an excellent teacher," Zara replied with a smile. "Though I doubt Miss Porter's academy ever envisioned her lessons on household management being applied quite this way." But it was Rebecca's observations about Asher that affected Zara most deeply. "The way he looks at you," Rebecca said softly one afternoon as they watched Asher and William from the porch, the two men deep in conversation near the corral. "It's quite something, Zara." "What do you mean?" Zara asked, though a warm glow spread through her chest at her friend's words. "He adores you. It's plain as day." Rebecca squeezed Zara's hand. "I confess, when I received your letter about marrying a stranger after Jonathan's death, I feared for you, but seeing you together—" She shook her head, smiling. "Whatever brought you two together, it was clearly meant to be." Meant to be. The phrase echoed in Zara's mind long after Rebecca and William had departed for Denver. As autumn painted the aspen trees gold and crimson, as the cattle drive to market came and went successfully, as she and Asher settled into the new intimacy of their fully realized marriage, Zara often thought about the strange turns of fate that had brought her to Colorado and to Asher. If Jonathan Pierce hadn't died, if Asher hadn't been in town that day, if she had chosen to return to Philadelphia instead of accepting his proposal, so many moments when her life could have taken a different path. Yet somehow, all those turns had led her here, to a life she could never have imagined but now couldn't imagine living without. Winter came early that year, the first snow falling in late October and continuing intermittently through November. The ranch settled into its winter routine, maintaining the reduced herd that remained in the valley, repairing equipment in preparation for spring, preserving meat as they butchered animals for winter provisions. The days grew shorter, the evenings longer, and Zara treasured the quiet hours spent with Asher before the fire, reading aloud from the growing collection of books he now regularly brought her from town. It was during one such evening, as wind howled around the sturdy log house and snow drifted against the windows, that Zara set aside her book and turned to Asher with the news she had been certain of for several weeks, but had waited to share until she was absolutely sure. "Asher," she began, her voice soft but steady, "I have something to tell you." He looked up from the bridle he was mending, his expression curious. "What is it?" "I believe we'll be welcoming a new member to the ranch come summer," she said, her hand moving instinctively to rest on her still flat stomach. "Around June, if my calculations are correct." Asher went very still, the bridle forgotten in his hands. "A baby, our baby." Zara nodded, suddenly nervous despite the joy that had filled her since she'd first suspected. "Are you pleased?" The bridle fell to the floor as Asher crossed the room in 2 long strides, kneeling before her chair and gathering her hands in his. "Pleased, Zara, I'm—" He shook his head, words seemingly inadequate. Instead, he pressed his lips to her hands, then looked up at her with eyes bright with emotion. "I never thought I'd have a family of my own. Never thought I'd find someone who could love this life, love me enough to stay." "I'm staying," Zara assured him, freeing one hand to touch his face. "This is where I belong, with you." Asher rose, drawing her up with him and into his embrace. "I love you, Zara Fletcher," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "I think I've loved you since that first day, though I was too stubborn to admit it even to myself." "And I love you," Zara replied, the words that had been in her heart for months finally spoken aloud. "My cowboy who stepped forward when no one else would." Asher's hands gently cradled her face as he kissed her, a kiss full of promise and future and home. When they parted, he rested one large hand reverently over her stomach. "A baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Our child." "The first of several, I hope," Zara said with a smile. "This house could use the sound of children's laughter." "Several, hum?" Asher's eyes crinkled at the corners, that smile she had come to love so well spreading across his face. "I think that can be arranged, Mrs. Fletcher." As they stood together before the fire, wrapped in each other's arms with the promise of new life growing between them, Zara thought of that frightening day in Cottonwood Springs when she had stood alone on the platform, her future in ruins. How could she have known then that the quiet cowboy who had stepped forward would become not just her rescuer but the love of her life? Life, she reflected, often delivered its greatest gifts in the most unexpected packages. A mail-order bride sent west with no one to claim her. A cowboy who said, "I will." And in that simple moment of courage and compassion, the seeds of a love story neither could have imagined, blooming like wildflowers after spring rain on the Colorado frontier. Spring of 1876 arrived with a riot of wildflowers carpeting the valley and the constant music of birdsong filling the air. As the land renewed itself, Fletcher Ranch bustled with activity, new calves tottering on spindly legs beside their mothers, freshly planted fields promising summer harvests, and the apple orchard a cloud of pink and white blossoms that perfumed the air around the house. Zara, now visibly carrying their child, moved more slowly these days but with a serene happiness that Asher told her made her more beautiful than ever. She had taken to sitting on the porch in the late afternoons, one hand resting on her rounded belly, feeling the baby's movements while watching Asher work with the horses in the corral or check the new calves in the nearby pasture. On one such afternoon in early May, almost exactly a year since she had first arrived at the ranch, Zara looked up from her sewing to see a wagon approaching along the road from town. This was unusual, they weren't expecting visitors, and Miguel had gone to Cottonwood Springs just yesterday for supplies. As the wagon drew closer, Zara recognized Mrs. Wilkins from the hotel sitting beside her husband on the driver's seat. Behind them in the wagon bed was what appeared to be a large trunk. "Asher," Zara called, setting aside her sewing and rising somewhat awkwardly to her feet. "We have visitors." Asher emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, and came to stand beside her on the porch as the wagon pulled up to the house. "Mrs. Wilkins, Mr. Wilkins," he greeted, surprise evident in his voice. This is unexpected." "Mr. Fletcher, Mrs. Fletcher," Mrs. Wilkins replied, beaming at them both. "I do hope we're not intruding, but something arrived in town that we thought you should have right away." "Oh." Zara moved carefully down the porch steps, curious despite her surprise. Mr. Wilkins was already clambering into the wagon bed to maneuver the trunk. "Came on yesterday's train," he explained. "Addressed to Mrs. Zara Fletcher, care of Cottonwood Springs Hotel. For me." Zara's surprise deepened. "But who would?" "There's a letter attached," Mrs. Wilkins said, producing an envelope from her reticule. "We didn't open it, of course." Zara accepted the envelope, immediately recognizing the precise handwriting of her brother Elias. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. "Zara," she read aloud, "Mother's trunk is rightfully yours, despite Father's will leaving all to me. Recent events have led me to reconsider many things, including my treatment of you. Consider this a belated wedding gift and an apology. Your brother Elias." "Mother's trunk?" Asher asked, coming to stand beside her. "It contains her wedding china, her silver, her lace tablecloths, family heirlooms I never expected to see again." Zara looked up at Asher, tears filling her eyes. "Things I thought lost to me forever." Asher put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her against his side. "Seems your brother has had a change of heart." "It appears so," Zara said wonderingly, tucking the letter into her pocket. "Mr. Wilkins, would you and Asher be so kind as to bring the trunk inside?" As the men maneuvered the heavy trunk into the house, Mrs. Wilkins linked her arm through Zara's. "My, look at you. When is the little one due?" "June," Zara replied, her free hand automatically moving to her belly. "Though Dr. Harrison says first babies often come late." "Well, you're blooming," Mrs. Wilkins declared. "Married life clearly agrees with you." Zara smiled, watching as Asher directed Mr. Wilkins to place the trunk in the parlor. "Yes, it does," she agreed softly. "Very much so." After the Wilkinses had been thanked, fed fresh apple cake and coffee, and sent on their way with a jar of Zara's strawberry preserves, Asher helped Zara open the trunk that had traveled so far to reach her. Inside, carefully packed in layers of muslin and tissue paper, were indeed the treasures Zara had mentioned: delicate Haviland china with hand-painted roses, heavy sterling silver flatware monogrammed with her mother's initials, Irish lace tablecloths and napkins, crystal goblets that caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. Beneath these were several framed photographs her parents on their wedding day, Zara as a baby in her mother's arms, the Montgomery family in front of their Philadelphia home. "It's like having a piece of them back," Zara said, carefully lifting out a silver teapot that had been her grandmother's. "A connection to my past that I thought was severed forever." Asher picked up one of the photographs, studying the formal portrait of Zara's parents. "You have your mother's eyes," he observed, "and her smile." "So I've been told," Zara replied, leaning against him as they sat together on the floor beside the open trunk. "She would have liked you, I think. Father would have been skeptical at first. He was skeptical of everyone, but your honesty would have won him over eventually." "And your brother?" Asher asked, setting down the photograph. "What changed his mind about you, about us?" Zara shook her head. "I don't know, his letter doesn't say, but whatever the reason, I'm grateful." She looked around their parlor, imagining the china displayed in the hutch Asher had built last winter, the silver gleaming on their table for special occasions, the lace tablecloths brightening their home. "These things belong here now with our family, a bridge between my past and our future." Asher's hand came to rest on her belly, where their child had just delivered a particularly vigorous kick. "Our future," he echoed, wonder still evident in his voice whenever he spoke of the baby. Sometimes I still can't believe how lucky I am. That day in Cottonwood Springs, when I saw you standing alone on that platform, I had no idea I was meeting my destiny. Zara turned in his arms, her hand coming up to touch his face, a face now as dear and familiar to her as her own. "Nor I mine," she said softly. "But I'm thankful every day that you were the one who stepped forward and said I will." "Best decision I ever made," Asher murmured, leaning in to kiss her tenderly. As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting the room in warm, golden light, Zara felt the fullness of her happiness like a tangible thing. This man who had become her heart's companion, this home they had built together, this child who would soon join them, and now these treasures from her past, all woven together into the rich tapestry of her life. A life that had begun, improbably, with a journey west to marry a man she had never met, only to find herself alone and unclaimed on a dusty platform in Colorado. A life transformed by the courage of a quiet cowboy who had looked at a stranded mail-order bride and seen not a burden but a possibility. "I love you, Asher Fletcher," Zara whispered against his lips, "more than I ever thought possible." "And I love you, Zara Fletcher," he replied, his blue eyes holding hers with the steady devotion that had become the cornerstone of her world. "More with each passing day." Outside, the apple blossoms drifted on the spring breeze, their sweetness a promise of the fruitful seasons to come, a promise that, like the love between the rancher and his unexpected bride, would only grow deeper and stronger with the passing years. On a warm June evening, as twilight painted the Colorado sky in shades of purple and gold, Sarah Elizabeth Fletcher entered the world with a lusty cry that announced her arrival to her waiting parents. Dr. Harrison, who had ridden out from Cottonwood Springs that morning when Miguel galloped in with news that Zara's time had come, pronounced both mother and daughter healthy and strong. "She has your eyes," Zara murmured to Asher as he sat beside her on the bed, gazing in wonder at the tiny bundle cradled in her arms. "Look, they're already so blue." "But your chin," Asher replied, his voice thick with emotion as he gently traced his daughter's perfect features with one calloused fingertip. "Stubborn already, I'd wager. With us as parents, how could she be otherwise?" Zara laughed softly, then winced at the lingering discomfort of childbirth. "Rest now," Asher said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You've done the hard work today. I'll watch over both my girls." And as Zara drifted into exhausted sleep, she knew with absolute certainty that he would, this man who had claimed her when she was lost, who had given her a home when she had none, who had loved her into a happiness greater than any she could have imagined on that fateful day in Cottonwood Springs when a mail-order bride found herself unclaimed, and a cowboy stepped forward to change both their destinies forever.